Kia ora and welcome to another episode of the Holistic Human Podcast. My name's Amanda Bradley, and today I am interviewing Christine Moginie, who I know through the Biodynamics Association, the New Zealand Biodynamics Association. She is a council member and she's been pretty active in the anthroposophical community for quite a few years. She's been a Steiner kindergarten teacher. She's really involved in biodynamics, obviously. She is an artist and teaches art. And she also has done a lot of work with anthroposophical biography, which if you don't know much about it, you should Google it because it's really interesting. I know that if you contacted her and asked her to help you out with yours, she would be quite happy to do so. She has the time. There's also a few videos on YouTube about it, but anyway, that will be a subject for another day, because today we are talking about the 12 Holy Nights, which is a meditative practice that occurs between December 24th and January the 6th. It's quite popular with anthroposophists, but also I'm sure in other Christian denominations, they probably do their own versions of it too. And we also talk about the Three Kings preparation, which is a biodynamic preparation that I haven't really heard of before, but Christine talks us through what it's made of and how it's used and when it's prepared. Before we get into the 12 Holy Nights and the Three Kings preparation, Christine talks about her life, which is fascinating. I ask you to kind of share kind of how her spiritual path has influenced her material life, I guess you could say. And she weaves a really interesting picture of how she grew up, really connected to the elemental world, and growing up as a child of the 1950s and a young person in the 60s and 70s when lots of things were changing, and the different practices and people and groups that she met and learned from, and yeah, how it's brought her to where she is today. I think Christine speaks a bit about the true notion of freedom, and why meditative practice and connecting with the natural world is really important during these times of uncertainty, and there does seem to be a real element or a real flavor of change and chaos, which from an objective perspective, change and chaos brings new growth and new opportunity, but it also brings a lot of pain and suffering and can be really uncomfortable and not pleasant for people. So it's nice to be reminded that we're not helpless, so to speak. There are things that we can do and actions we can take to grow ourselves personally, to heal our planet, and to kind of come together as humanity, and learn to love each other no matter what. Not that it's easy, but there are things that you can do to help facilitate that within you. And since it's almost Advent, or Advent is upon us, I'm recording this at the end of November in 2021. I thought it would be an appropriate time to talk about the 12 Holy Nights and the Three Kings prep, so that you can maybe go into the Christmas season with an idea of how you're going to acknowledge what's happening in the cosmos around the solstice time, and what you want to bring into your next year, 2022. Is that where we are? 2022. Anyway, that's enough of me rambling. If you want to support the podcast, you can go to my Buy Me a Coffee page. I think it's buymeacoffee.com or something. And that helps pay for the podcast hosting and my internet bill. I've also got some stuff up for sale on my Etsy page. If you wanted to go check that out, I'm selling some paintings and some felted sculptures. And I also sell handwork lesson plans that have tutorials and lesson plans and instructions on how to teach your kids how to make cool stuff. So you can support me by purchasing something from there. Or the free way you can support me, which is just as appreciated, is by sharing this podcast with your friends, sharing it on social media, commenting on, liking my posts, and subscribing to wherever you are listening to me. Subscribe to my channel, wherever you're listening to me. Okay, without further ado, I'll let Christine speak for herself, because she is a great storyteller, and this one is a little bit on the long side, but I reckon it's super interesting. So just settle in, get your knitting out, or get pottering in the garden, turn on the car, go for a nice long journey. Whatever it is you're doing, enjoy. And yeah, go well. Before I do though, I shall welcome Christine to the Holistic Human Podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Amanda, for inviting me. And yeah, I'm interested to know what we'll end up actually talking about.
I know, it's going to be fun. So I will start with a verse, and then you can say a verse, and then we'll get into it and tell people about you and everything else.
Cool.
So this is a Māori verse called Whakataka te hau. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hi ake ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhunga, ti hei Māori ora. Kia ora.
In the free being of man, the universe is gathered up. Then, in the free resolve of your heart, take your own life in hand, and you will find the world. The spirit of the world will find itself in you.
Thank you.
So that's a Steiner verse as usual.
As usual, nice to add
one,
that in there.
one that I've been working with about this free being of man, or the human. Yeah. So
where's it from? Do you know? Or is it just in a book of verses?
I've got verses and meditations.
Oh yeah.
Steiner, probably seen it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a bit of a Bible, and every year I try and give myself a new one to learn, as a bit of a, I suppose, a mantra would be the way to sort of think about it. And yeah, there seems to be a lot of discussion about freedom and what it means to be free. And I've noticed something on your podcast or comments sometimes, and I think it was just this week, around it's not just free to do whatever we want, it's actually about the freedom to take up this journey of connecting our soul and spirit here on earth, and trying to sort of follow our destiny when we're in times that could be looked at from two different viewpoints. One, we're being pushed somewhere that we don't want to go into, what appears to be quite a dark space, but on the other hand, all these challenges, if I look in my life, and I'm sure it's the same for everybody, they're where we grow most. And like everybody else, it's easy to become complacent and just puddle along, and consciousness starts sort of slipping away, responsibility starts slipping away, awareness starts slipping away. And so, it feels, if I can try and look at what's happening at the moment in the world, like another time of having to pull ourselves into line, or myself into line. What am I here to do? Am I doing it? How do I want to do it? Yeah. And as somebody who doesn't usually fit into the square box that something else is trying to fit me into, then I like to find how I can do that, but still respectfully as well. So yeah.
Nice. Thanks. Well, that's a great way to begin speaking, I think. About you, Christine. So we're going to be talking about the 12 Holy Nights, which is like a meditative practice that happens over Advent. And although I've heard about it a lot, I haven't actually fully done it, the whole thing. And I thought it would be great just before Advent and Christmas to talk to somebody who has done it before about what it is. And then also we would finish things off with talking about the Three Kings preparation, which is a biodynamic preparation that, again, I'd never heard of before until you posted about it on Instagram or mentioned it. And that sounded really interesting. And I thought people could hear a little bit about that. But before we jump into that content, I think it's always good to kind of situate the person in this podcast, if you know what I mean, to introduce you and what your journey's been so far in terms of your spiritual life influencing where your material, this dimensional life has taken you. So how your spiritual path has influenced your day-to-day life, I'd say. So in terms of how much you're willing to share, I thought it would be cool just to kind of hear a bit about how you grew up and how you found anthroposophy and what you've done with your life with it, if that makes sense.
Yep, sure. Well, it's a big life and there's a lot in there. So, you know, thinking about which parts might be relevant for people to know about, I suppose. Sorry, cough. Yeah, so I grew up. My surname is Moginie, and so I grew up from the beginning having to spell it at school because it's Swiss French. Although my parents are sort of came through English, Scottish, and Swedish, Australian, but also Swedish sort of lineage. And so it's interesting having a very different surname, and I'm quite interested in names and the meaning of words and sound and colour and so forth as well, which from a very early age I was fascinated by colour and I was fascinated by nature. And just to put it at the beginning, the closest translation for Moginie that I've ever been able to come across is herder of cows, which is quite hilarious now that I'm 65 and I've spent over 35 years working with biodynamics and becoming a good shit stirrer of cow food. So, you know, it's, as a child, of course, you're part of the world and the world is part of you, and you don't know that you're different or the same or anything. You're just part of everything. But I remember wanting my surname to be Smith or Brown when I was younger because, and it's continued all through my life, having to spell it and people being embarrassed trying to get it right and getting it wrong and being called all sorts of things. And so, you know, it's something that matters on one level and it doesn't on another, because obviously whatever we're named is really important in this lifetime. And I grew up, so this is why I'm quite intrigued with Whānau, with a very strong connection to nature and the elemental beings, and spent a lot of time, according to my mother, and I have some memories, of course, not before 3, because most of us don't remember that, spending hours sitting by the snowdrops under the apple tree in the garden in Auckland, where I grew up, talking to them, and they were as real to me as people. You know, I still have that deep memory, I suppose. And fortunately, my mother, you know, was a storyteller, and she told us all the myths and legends, and kept that whole side of myself alive. So, you know, it's probably why I chose her. I cry a lot when people come in, so I have a connection. So I'll apologize now. Yeah, when I get moved, I either cry because I'm happy, or I'm sad, or I feel something. And so she accepted that I had to bring my imaginary friends to dinner, and I have a sense that there actually was another human being, spirit, as well as the imaginary elemental world, as I'll call them. And places were set at the table to allow that to happen, which, you know, looking back, it's pretty amazing, because I don't know any other mothers that I've met along the way, you know, especially of my mother's generation and my father's generation, that would have kind of been open and done that. So she was very pivotal in keeping my, I'm just going to call it, spiritual soul connection alive, my imagination. She was very practical, grew up on a farm, and in lots of ways was almost like the breadwinner of the family. She was very down to earth. She was Sagittarian, so very ahead of her time, land girl during the Second World War, born in 1917, which, you know, so she was 38 when she had me. Interestingly, I was 38 when I had my daughter. Yeah, so, and that tends to happen, not all the time, but with quite a lot of people. And so we used to go down to the farm. She had 2 brothers, and the brother that had the farm had 6 kids. And so my sister and I, who was 18 months younger than me, we used to go down. She'd drive us down all the way from Auckland to Mangaweka, which then was like a 12-14 hour drive in the Humber 80, no seatbelt, to basically run around the farm, you know, with 6 cousins, which was the highlight of my year, and certainly her year as well. And she wasn't a city person, but so she became quite animated, and we saw another side of her there. And so then my father was he was an only child who was born in 1910. So he had very strong Victorian upbringing, but his mother was a beautiful artist, absolutely beautiful watercolorist, interestingly enough. And his father was, I believe, a carpenter, so worked with wood. I still have his beautiful curry tables and a whole lot of things, beautiful boxes. And I donated his tools to Michael Park with John Laurie when I was working there.
Wow.
When I came back to Auckland for the outdoor classroom. So, you know, they've gone to a good home. Yeah. And my father was somebody who really taught me to appreciate beauty, and struggled as somebody born in 1910 would as an only child. He was in the Second World War, not full on like my uncle was, but in Fiji. And he was a very shy person, quite introverted really, and, you know, really didn't cope, I don't think, with having 2 daughters running around the house and so forth. So in a way, he wasn't particularly present, but that paradigm of being born in 1956 of, you know, the man is the man of the household, and, you know, the wife has to do all the cooking, the cleaning, put the slippers and give him the pipe, you know, that kind of environment was what I came into. So a very forward-thinking mother with, I suspect, quite a strong spiritual connection, and a father with a lot of love in himself, but not able to really show that. And so there wasn't a lot of physical expression of love in our family. And that has been an interesting journey when I've looked at others' biographies as well, where there's been, shall we say, an abundant family life, say like my cousins down on the farm, where everybody muddles in and it's all like puppies and everybody's rumbling and rolling around, but there's hugs and there's kisses and there's, you know, there's shoutings and there's all sorts of things. And we were a very contained family where people really didn't talk to one another much at all. My parents' relationship was pretty typical of that time. My mother went out to work and looking back, I think she went to work so that she could possibly, you know, keep some of my activities alive. I was pretty bright, very good at athletics, running in particular, loved being in the outdoors, had to walk through the bush to get to school, was consistently late because, of course, I'd just go and play in the bush with my friends and bring some treasure back and go like, oh God, she's late again. And so I'm mentioning this just to sort of give a little bit of a background. And I was fortunate enough to have the same amazing teacher twice in primary school, who also was a very forward-thinking, particularly for that time, man. I suspect he may have been homosexual, but he was incredibly creative. He was, you know, if you imagine the ideal teacher, then he still fits into that picture for me. And he used to make up a story about a horse called Silver Flash. That was our reward if we did our schoolwork well. And, you know, just things like that, which you never got back in school. And it's even worse, I imagine, now. But he did lots of music, lots of stories, lots of art, took us to the bush, took us to the beach, you know, really gave us in a way, like a Steiner education, a real connection with the world. And was very well loved and respected, and actually stayed at that school right until up, and he's recently died a few years ago. Must be in his 80s now. But yeah, really somebody that so many children admired. So that sort of everyday life, I suppose, you know, was part of my world. And so I was quite inward. I was very shy. I didn't have a lot of friends at school, and I didn't realize how different I was then. But looking back, as I've done my biography work, of course, it's like, wow, you know, I've really appreciated what my mother did, particularly. And in a sense, you know, after he died, I came to understand my father a lot more. But we clashed like anything.
What was his star sign?
Sorry?
What was his star sign?
It was Taurus. And my mum was, yeah.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
You know, Taurians and Aquarians, you know, it depends. I've got some lovely Taurus friends and all, but yeah, and just that old. So once again, I grew up with this thing of the message of really coming up against something, and that would activate me. And then I'm very conscious of having a strong connection with the stars. I spent a lot of time outside talking to the stars as a child. I remember, and I'm not sure how old I was and why this is, but it was a memory that came up when I was thinking, ooh, what will I share? That of going out and being very angry with all the spiritual world about, why did you put me here on this earth? Why, you know, look, I'm sure I was destined to go somewhere else. This is totally the wrong place. I can't relate to how these people relate to one another. Look at the way they treat each other. They don't care for the elementals. They can't see what's going on. You know, just really getting stuck into them, which, you know, is a bit odd, I suppose, for a child to have. And yet there are children I've worked with over the years that also have had that side of things. And so at 9, I had a really interesting experience, which, as you know, if you've done biography work, is often the time when you're you cross, and you'll be starting to cross into that outer world. You're starting to wake up from the inner. I'm part of the world, and the world is part of me, and becoming a bit conscious about things. And somebody asked me one day, what are you going to be when you grow up? And a voice inside of me, and I'll say in my head, but it's not really in my head, it's around me, said, a spiritual teacher. And in that moment, I thought, oh, I can't say that, because one, I had no idea at age 9 what a spiritual teacher was. And two, it was like, okay, at 9, that's, you know, it's not like a fireman or a ballerina, or, you know, I want to be a princess or something. Anyway, so I said, oh, maybe a teacher. And so that clearly has been my journey all the way through, and I've ended up teaching a lot of what is regarded as spiritual things along the way. Journey of being quick to take things up, getting into it, doing things quite well, and then something coming from the outside world, often with illness or being stopped in some way, and having to retreat back in again. And so that gesture of Aquarius with eurythmy, of moving forward and moving back, I can so relate to that, you know. But somewhere in the middle, there's that little, oh, yes, okay, and then we're off again.
Yeah.
And then it keeps going. So it's, and the duality and the two streams. So I've had my physical life and I've had a very strong spiritual life as well, which I learned to keep under wraps for a long time. I spent 3 years or so in and out of hospital because my knee's dislocated. I have a hypermobile body, so I'm really flexy and things like that. And at adolescence, you know, I you know, could be running or playing tennis or whatever, and my kneecaps would dislocate. And I'd be in, horrible, painful, not nice.
Ouch.
And I'd be in hospital and, you know, operated and knee put back in and then operated on and plaster for 6 weeks and rehab and blah, blah, blah. So once again, interestingly, 13, 14, a lot of inward time. You know, when you're starting to explore that world of astrality and making friends and socializing. And I'd been put ahead a year at school when I was in primary school. And so by the time I got to like 5th and 6th form, I was 15 and 16. So I was only 16 when I finished school, and I felt that year's difference of being, you know, a year and behind pretty much everybody else in the class. And at that stage, I really started to rebel, and I didn't feel like I fitted into the world at all. But because I could no longer sort of do my athletics, I met a lady who did yoga when I was 16, and I started doing yoga, and she used to take us through meditation, and I developed a nice relationship with her. And so that kind of opened up in time with what was happening in the world for us, of moving from the Victorian age to the 60s, 70s, 80s influence.
Yeah.
And so this whole opening, or this whole possibility for a spiritual awareness, came about through things like standing against apartheid, the Parihaka movement, Rainbow Warrior, you know, trying to stop nuclear testing in Mururoa, Vietnam War. All of those outer events, like they're happening now today, you know, really pushed a lot of us. You know, music changed, rock and roll started to come in, fantastic music, which of course we're still listening to today. And as my daughter says, it's still the best music, Mum. And so, started smoking marijuana. People would sort of get into social drinking, things like that. So there was a whole exploring of boundaries. Osho, Rajneesh became very popular. Lots of gurus, lots of kirtan, lots of spiritual festivals, Sweetwater's Nambassa, a whole lot of other things kind of almost burst onto the scene. And it was a very rich time for young people to start exploring a more spiritual side of themselves, I suppose. When I left school, I went to do kindergarten teacher training because that was the only thing I was vaguely interested in doing. I wanted to go to art school, but my dad, no way was his daughter going to art school. You know, no, that's not happening. And in hindsight, you know, perhaps I'm grateful now for that, because of course I came to it later in anthroposophy. And in training college, I met a group of 5 other women, 3 of whom I'm still really good friends with. In fact, my best friend is still, well, best 2 friends, but bestest friend is still from that time. So already there was this sense of connection with tribe. And then I met a lady called Halima, who's a Sufi teacher that some people may have heard of, because she started the Shada retreat down in kind of Hamilton way. Had a really interesting connection with her. I was very involved in Indian sort of philosophies, lots of meditation, and became vegetarian, you know, did all those things. Look, there's hundreds of things I could mention that came about that I did. And being me, teachers would come, I'd go and I'd learn, I'd study, all sorts of things. And so that journey carried on, and at 21 I sailed to Australia on a 120-year-old Swedish bark, 120 foot long, which was a bit of a mission because it took 10 days to get there. No, 3 weeks to get there instead of 10 days. And basically it was sinking. So journeys. And in Australia, even though both my grandfathers were dead and my father's mother died when I was 18 months old, and my nana, my mum's mother, died when I was about 7 years old. So I didn't have a lot of grandparently influence, but I had this strong connection with my granddad, who took me to Australia, basically. Just not in physical form, but, you know, in my connection with my team, as I call them, I suppose. And yeah, as you know, Australia sort of knocks you into shape. I don't know if you've ever lived there, but it's, you know, New Zealanders, we sort of float around in the etheric realm, and we're watery and we're laid back, and we're just, everything's kind of laissez-faire. Australia, it's like, right, let's wake you up. And so it was really good for me in that sense. Lots of colour, lots of vibrancy, lots of spiritual things to get in and out of. And then, to cut a very long story short, when I was 27, I had done a 10-day Vipassana retreat, and I went to stay with some friends in a place called Mittagong in New South Wales in Australia, who I'd done some rebirthing and things with when I lived in Whānau. And they needed to go back to England to renew their visa. So I managed the little craft shop and lived there for a year, and a whole heap of things came to an end at that time. And I ended up meeting Benjamin and Tyne Cherry, who were involved in starting the Bowral Steiner School in New South Wales. And that was kind of the third time I'd come into meeting anthroposophy. I mean, where I grew up is not that far from Michael Park School, and I knew people who were involved in setting that up kind of on the periphery. When I was living on a community farm in Bellingen in New South Wales, they were just starting the Steiner School there, and I was involved in painting walls and doing all sorts of stuff. And then, so this was kind of the third time that Steiner education had come my way. And so I got involved with the school as the sort of helper and kindergarten assistant with Tyne Cherry, and worked there part-time with her, and did painting there from years 1 to 7 over several years. So, but 27 was quite a pivotal year for me. It was the first year of Parsifal College in Sydney, which was the course for anthroposophy, orientation course it was called. And it was initially just a term. And so I went to study there, and near the end of that term, but not quite, my mum got diagnosed with cancer. So I came back to New Zealand and nursed her before she died. And part of the reason why I get emotional talking about her is it proof? I don't know. I mean, at some stage we do need proof that the spiritual world is as real as the physical world. We can have our experiences, but my experience of being with her, and then on the evening that she died, was really quite pivotal, I think, in taking me another whole step closer to really believing that we have this massive support of the spiritual world with us if we ask. And I saw her angel at the end of the bed the night that she died. Wow. But interestingly, my aunt and uncle had come up to spend the night there. She was very agitated. She was already in a coma at that stage. but I went to stay at my sister's place. And I was reading occult science at the time on sleep and death. As you do.
Yes, you do.
So I couldn't sleep, and so I sort of read the first stage, and then I heard my mum's voice say in my head, "That's enough now, go to sleep." And I did. And I don't think I've ever slept so deeply, because the nurse came round to tell us, because they tried to ring, none of us heard the phone, that mum had actually died. She was pounding on the door. And I remember the experience of swimming up like from the bottom of the ocean to try and come back into some form of awakeness, and going there and having to sort of make the stand of, no, please, can we wait for 3 days before we bury her? It's really important, you know, all that sort of thing. And fortunately, one of the undertakers supporting me in that, you know, because you're not that confident at 27 about these things. And then the next day was the study group that I had been going to. It was a Steiner study group with Frank Knowles. He was quite well known here. And previously 6 of us had been going to that study group. And nobody else turned up that day that I went. And so we read all the verses to the dead. And it was, you know, so it was just this amazing kind of gift, I guess, and connection. And I've had over the years a lot of friends and family and teachers and people that I've worked with die. So I kind of have felt, and I've helped facilitate quite a lot of funerals, for want of, or passings over, I suppose, just ended up in those situations, and you sort of do best. So I feel like there's huge support. There's a huge amount of backup. It's not just a football team, it's, I don't know, you know, there's hundreds of them there. Come on, get on with it, get on, you've got to do this, you know. But the thing was passable was that, my dad had a heart attack just before my mum had died, so I stayed to look after him for a bit, and then I really felt I needed to go back to Australia. So at 28, I went back and I repeated. I went back to Pastoral College, did that first term of orientation, and then 2 terms of teacher training. And that's where I felt like I caught up in my biography. It's like my physical and my spiritual connections came together. And one of the things that, there's lots of things, but I met my painting teacher, Anna Kundit, there. And so I, started working with her for 3 years. Then she died, interestingly, the year just before my dad died, which was 32, 33. I realised the whole recapitulation of the evolution of consciousness had been my exact journey through spirituality to coming to Steiner education. So all these, it was like really coming to how the world could be going to Pastoral College. Amazing lecturers, Hungarians that had escaped from the war, Jewish, horrendous stories, God. But the most amazing people that just had such depth of knowledge, and especially for us in the Southern Hemisphere, where we're very new, and it's fine, just to come back to this thought of freedom, we are free to read these books on anthroposophy and Steiner and look at how we can apply that to the world. But that wealth of like that big team of support that can be a plus and a minus in Europe and in other Northern Hemisphere countries, wasn't there. And so, I feel very privileged to have got that from these people that really embodied anthroposophy in a very beautiful heart, Christ-held way, and brought me to really look at the real story of the Christ being, not the church version. So complicated, and yet over the years, I've got Christ and Christine, so obviously coming back to names again, there's something there for me to look into and to build that inner relationship that I've always had with how do I bring that into the world. And so it has come through my art classes, it's come through teaching, working with children, working with adults, when my painting teacher, Anna, died, there was nobody to take up her work. So I started my conversations in colour classes, knew like that much. And, okay, gotta stand up here, shy person, really horrible, nervous, that still happens, but I got better at it. And so my journey's gone on. I ended up teaching art back at Pastoral College with some other younger people that sort of came on board. I set up a little art school in a place called L'Atelier, which was the old silent movie theatre in Glebe in Sydney. That's where I met my ex-husband, who's also an artist, also involved in anthroposophy, pretty fiery, interesting individual character with a even more challenging destiny than some other people I know. And we ended up having a really sort of on-off relationship, but married, had a child, separated. I brought her up on my own since she was 3 months old. She's now 27, interestingly. So, all these little synchronicities. But apart from the art side of things and working in the social science section, getting involved doing Steiner-based counselling course with a friend also that I met at Pastoral. I've ended up going to China with Tyne, because she and Benjamin set up Waldorf education in China, Taiwan, China, Vietnam. She's Vietnamese. So, you have all these relationships that you develop with a completely different form of family. And so my view, looking back at my physical family that I incarnated into, and looking at the gifts and the challenges of that can then be brought out in meeting one's tribe, the Maikao school, as we know, as it's called, where probably we are here to forge new ways. And I'm usually 5 or 10 years ahead of where things are, and that's been a frustration in the past because I get enthusiastic about stuff and just want to get in there and do it. What I've ended up developing is a combination of art and biography and process-oriented psychology with biography, counselling, put that together into a package. And then the biodynamic gardening was the other love, and that was one of the first books that I actually picked up that was my entrance into anthroposophy, because it's such a big library, world. You go, God, which one of all of those things could I start with? And so it was very much a book on biodynamics by Maria Thun, interestingly enough. And then Brian Keats, when my dad died, he left us some money. I bought a house in Mittagong, and that was 1.25 acres. So I just grew flowers and vegetables and plants and so forth, but began working with biodynamic preparations. And so Brian Keats was living there, so he came and he used to lead workshops at my place. So we did that for about 10 years.
Oh, great. The guy that does that cool astro calendar.
Yeah. So he does the astro calendar. And he and his wife and their 2 kids were involved in the school for a while. And there's Hamish Mackay and Terry Foreman were also well-known biodynamic practitioners. So they came and did some workshops as well. So I had lots of practical experience on the land. And my first experience of putting out 500, it was getting dark as I got down to the back paddock. And, I was doing my thing, flicking it out, could feel the energy as I did it. But at a certain point, I turned around, and it was just one of those moments that I used to love when I did Tai Chi, where you sort of have that moment before dusk or dawn, or, there's that little out breath. I guess it's that moment in the M movement. And I could see as the sun came across where I had been with the 500 and where I hadn't, because of the change in the prana in the air. There's been some ping moments in my life, and that was clearly one of them. And it was just amazing. It was like, oh my God, this is where I've been, and I could see what it was actually doing, enlivening the life forces, and I could see over here it wasn't the same. And so with every flick of the brush in that short time, I could really see, not just feel, what was being changed. And so, you know, there's little experiences, I suppose, of inverted commas proof that people could go, well, you know, how do you measure that scientifically? It's, well, actually, I don't need to. I had an actual experience of it. So, and remembering past lives and all sorts of things. So I have built a bit of a library of experiences, I suppose, that for me are just as real as sitting here, you know, talking to you through this world of whatever. So yeah. So yeah, as I said, it's a long story, it's a big story, and yeah, there's lots of things there, but that perhaps gives a bit of an overview where now I'm 65, I'm in my sort of Saturn phase of my biography, and I'm looking at what needs to be completed, and going forward, what can I bring for either my next incarnation or whatever it is that's going to happen. If hopefully we will get them if we can stand up and fight against these forces that are helping us to do that at the moment in the world. And I sense that we're in another, having been through that of 60s, 70s kind of awakening, that we're in another one of those again. It will be different, but already I think we can start to see different groups of people getting together, people realizing that materialism isn't perhaps the only way to live one's life, and that those Ahrimanic forces can be helpful, but they can be too strong, as well as, you know, completely leaving the world and going too much into the sort of Luciferic aspect of things is not also a place we can live for a long time, that we need to come back to this heart space, this heart center, connect with the Christ and the Sophia, you know, anthroposophy, the wisdom of life, of the human being, of the spiritual world. So, you know, that's my, is it a mission? I don't know. It seems to be my destiny picture of how to bring enough understanding that can be shared in some way with other people, to encourage people to work on their soul and spiritual connection, so that not only can we work for ourselves, but whatever we do works to help those spiritual beings that have sacrificed their lives and need to also move on in their evolution in the same way that we do. So I'm coming to that place now of starting to understand the responsibility of doing daily practice again, consciously, and really taking responsibility for everything that we do, say, believe, etc. It takes a lot to be conscious. It's very easy. I'll just go for a coffee. Yeah, that's fine. But can we go for a coffee and be conscious? And in that consciousness, be aware, weird thought, what is it we're actually drinking, imbibing, taking in? You know, is it a substance, a liquid substance in a cup that is solid, or is it a life force? And how do we honor and thank that life force for its sacrifice? And maybe that will lead into the 12 Holy Nights kind of thing. I was
just thinking, well, that does take us into the 12 Holy Nights. I wonder, thank you for sharing all of that, by the way. Really nice to hear those stories. I love hearing stories about people's lives. And
I know, biographies are amazing.
And I forgot that you do the biography thing. And when we, ages ago, I wanted to do a podcast on biographies, on the anthroposophical biography. So it's nice for you to have introduced that, and maybe people are thinking, what's the anthroposophical biography? But we might have to leave that for another time. But Christine, you sometimes offer doing consultations for people's biographies, do you? So yeah. I'll put contact details of yours in the show notes in case somebody wants to get in touch at some point.
Cool.
But for now, shall we move on to what the 12 Holy Nights are?
Yes. So
could you introduce us to them? What are they? Where did they start? And why do anthroposophists like them so much?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question, Amanda. I'm not sure how I would answer that. I think, I think the picture for me of where it came from is this whole sense of the rhythm of the year, which in simple terms can be that cross of the solstices and the equinoxes, and that connection with the starry realms, which, yes, we've got astronomy, we've got astrology, and then, of course, with anthroposophy, we have Astrosophy, which brings the two together. So we've got the observable sidereal, can go out at night sky, we can see what constellations are above us at any particular time, and that influence with the year that most of us aren't conscious of. And that's where biodynamics is a fantastic way, because you can start with the moon rhythms, for example. Where's the moon? What phase is it in its waxing, waning journey? But then there's the descending, ascending movement as well, which is like a little mini version every month of the sun's rhythm, that it goes north and south each sort of roughly 6 months of the year, but it also rises and sets east and west. So there's always this cross that, holds the world, the egg of the world, perhaps, is a good way to sort of look at that. And around that, of course, is the atmosphere. I often call it the Sophia atmosphere, the life forces. And how to say this simply, it's never simple in anthroposophy, is it? So, you have your elements of warmth and air and water and earth, but you also have the ether effect of your life forces, your chemical or sound ether, your light, and of course your warmth ethers. And so there's always this relationship, it's not a duality, but it's a relationship between what's here in front of us and what is it that is already being created that is helping to move something into coming into being. Tricky thought, it's like, yes, we're here in this physical body, but we got here through a whole journey, and we changed and evolved, and a sacrifice to a certain extent, or something had to be left behind for the next phase or the next development to come about. Think about in the womb, the development of the fetus that goes through that whole journey, but then has to leave the world and learn how to breathe, how to eat, how to shit, how to move. Everything has to be learned. And so that's a struggle, that there's something we have to wrestle with, and we maintain it, and then we have to let it go. Again, you can't just keep hanging on to it. No, I'm only going to be 3 and I don't want to be any more, and I'm going to hold myself back. So in the big picture of the 12 holy nights of, the whole evolution of the world, etc., there's always been this outer becoming inner, inner becoming outer. Summer bringing the cosmic forces towards the earth through the equinox at autumn, and I have this sense of this balance, this exchange that occurs perhaps at these times, that whether you think of it as the archangels or however you want to picture it, that something is carried forward and offered and then taken up and has to be, shall we say, digested or created anew. And this rhythm goes on like the rising, setting sun, etc. We don't think about it most of the time, but it's there all the time. We wouldn't be here without it. And then with the winter solstice, things really get digested, and all that cosmic influence, if we like to think about it from the spiritual world, goes into the earth, becomes Christianized, Christized. The elementals work with it. It then gets offered back up to the spring equinox, back up as a gift, an offering to the cosmos, and for us in summer. So opposite side of the world, we do our offering in summer. And if you think about it, we're out and we're bubbly and we're socializing, we're at the beach, And in a way, we're not very conscious. We're quite out of ourselves, as against winter, even if it's not living in a cold place. We wear more clothes, we're a bit more inward. We perhaps don't go out as much, but we spend a bit more time looking at ourselves. So the 12 holy nights, my understanding of it, is like a mini, well, a microcosm of that macrocosm. So, you know, Christmas for us, the Christian version was overlaid, as they all were, over the existing, what might be called pagan rituals anyway. So the solstice for us around Christmas is usually around about the 21st, 22nd of December. You know, it came very close last year. I think it was the 23rd. So we were almost on the 25th. And so it's very close. The same, you can look at the other winter solstice, and you can look at the equinoxes as well. We won't go into that because that's all not part of this. So with Advent, which yes is a Christian, what I call it, ritual, I don't know, structure. It's the 4 weeks, it's the preparation for this time. So anything that's existing now must have had a reason for coming into being before. We can investigate that. So with the 4 weeks before Christmas, the 4 Sundays before Christmas, we start to work with the elemental, the mineral realm for Sunday that's just gone, then the plant realm, the elemental realm, as well as what we're starting to sort of connect with, then the animal or the astral realm, and then we come to the human realm, which, you know, Christmas Eve, the birth of the Christ. So that can just be an intellectual concept, or we can start to make that preparation for that journey for ourselves, whether it's towards the solstice, if people can't connect with Christianity, but if you come to an understanding of the Christ being, having sacrificed life forces for the earth so we could continue and develop this individuality, then it's an opportunity to acknowledge, to give thanks, from my viewpoint, gratitude, consciousness around how on earth have we got here? You know, really, I mean, some days when I sit down and think about it, and I think over the millions of years, we've never been like we are now. And imagining the enormity of all that it's taken for all of us to get here. And then we're going on, you know, because it doesn't stop. And so to be able to hold that massive picture, which really for a bodhisattva or a sun being to actually incarnate into a physical body for 3 years, from 30 to 33, you know, I mean, you know, really. It's not just, just drive down the road for a glass of wine number. It's massive. And so we, you know, with the different calendars, and there's so many different calendars and they don't always overlay, but, you know, for us, we come to the end of the year, and there's something that happens at this time of year, going forward from Beltane, which for us, you know, at the end of October, everything gets a bit sort of manic and a bit, and suddenly we've got to see everybody, and we've got to go here, and we've got to, and yet somehow that's a bit of that spring elemental activity, a little bit of Michaelmas kind of, whoa, we've got to just hold these forces a little bit here. It's almost like an unconscious rush to complete something. So the 12 holy nights, as far as I work with them, look, you know, there's a million different ways to do things. For me, start on Christmas Eve, and maybe that kind of French connection, you know, I've always felt to celebrate Christmas Eve as my Christmas, Christmas Day is the day after, and so forth. So one can really, if that preparation has happened, think about what is it that we want to birth for the year ahead. What is it that we want to put in that cradle? What is it that we want the support of the divine masculine, divine feminine, whatever you want to call it, the spiritual world, the earthly world, to support going forward into a whole new year, a whole new sun rhythm? and that sun connection with the Christ, of course, is something that spoke to me at a certain point. I think it sort of kicked in possibly the first Christmas I had without my daughter when she went to her father's, and suddenly it was like, oh, what am I going to do? You know. So anyway, little messages come and I go, oh yeah, I'll follow that. So I came across Prokofiev's book, The 12 Holy Nights and the Spiritual Hierarchies, which is kind of like reading Steiner. So you need to understand Steiner speak to a certain extent, but it gives a really lovely picture of this almost dance between the wisdom Sophia and the Christ force, but all the spiritual hierarchies. So it pulls in an awful lot, and that sparked me. I mean, as I think it was you said, or someone said, oh, I love the color of the cover, you know, the colors. It was just like, oh, that's an interesting book.
Yeah, I'll read that one.
And so it's deep thinking. You know, I have to read a chapter and that's it. So the way I work and the way I understand is that, so on Christmas Eve, I form a question. I find a question to do with, well, what's coming, and I do a reflection a little bit in preparation going towards New Year's Eve, of what I want, what the year's been like. You know, like just starting that backward journey to move forward. Scan gesture, and then Christmas Day is like January for me. So I think whatever, I pay attention to what happens on Christmas Day, on that day. Do I go out? Do I stay in? Who do I connect with? Where do things get a bit, where do they flow easily? What's happening? Boxing Day is February.
The one just been, or the one ahead?
Right, the one ahead.
Oh, okay. All right.
Cool. Yeah. I would do that. If you're being a Gemini, you'll be able to do the one back as well. If you can think back, yeah. Yep. So it's helpful, you know, to go back and reflect. What did I write at the beginning of the year? And sometimes I miss a day and that, but you just get a flavour.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, good to think back. What was I doing last year? What do I want to take forward? What have I achieved, or what's happening just on a personal level? And then so then 27th is March, 28th April, etc. So that's how I go through it, so that I kind of get a little bit of a view of what might be coming. And it's so spot on. I mean, I've done it for 25-ish years. You know, there's always something in there that really gives me, like in this time where it's completely unknown. And interestingly, I didn't get some things on some days. There was some gaps when I look back at last year. It was like, oh, don't know what's going to happen. And I couldn't possibly have known that this was going to happen then. So even more important to do this. So I do that for those 12 days, or 12 nights, 13 days, till we come to January the 6th. So obviously January the 6th is December.
Oh yeah.
And we're also coming to, it's called Three Kings Day. It's called Epiphany. So there's a connection to St. John's. I won't go into it, it's too long. People can look into it. Connection with St. John the Baptist, who helped as the forerunner of the Christ being. There's a connection with Joan of Arc, and there is people not too sure what day she was born on. I have a very strong connection to her. I often become emotional reading anything about her. There's a connection with obviously the three kings, the gifts that they brought to the Christ child, and of course reading Steiner and the Gospels, which took me a long time to come to. You know, you get these 4 different pictures of what was really going on from different viewpoints and different layers, which is absolutely fascinating. I find it amazing storytelling. But you know, who came when? Yeah, the shepherds, what the shepherds saw, that instinctive kind of earth knowledge, and what we could call the wise kings. Maybe they were human, maybe they weren't. You know, that that brought those spiritual gifts. So you, once again, you have this inner and outer, these layers of the earthly and the spiritual coming together. But the gifts that they brought were frankincense, myrrh, and gold, Balthazar, Melchidor, and Caspian. Yeah. And you know, so they were from very different countries. They weren't all from the same country. So there's also, you know, the whole bloodline kind of spiritual tribe connection coming in there, if people want to investigate that. And so for me, I try and look at what are those gifts of that wisdom, that overcoming death, that new life, because myrrh is to do with embalming and death.
Yep.
Frankincense is the support of the soul, and it's also a kind of honoring of the spiritual. And the gold, of course, is the heart forces, and also the wisdom of, well, I guess, of the soul spiritual connection, one could say. And so, you know, what are those essences in my life? So the way I've found to bring that together is I've run vision board workshops on the 6th. So people come, we use the inner child tarot cards. Everyone pulls a card that gives a nice little message that helps with the focus. What's my question? What do I want to focus on and work for the year? And then we spend lovely time cutting images and words out of magazines and gluing them on to a board. And then a sharing of what has come up. So you end up with this pictorial or picture and word strategy, I suppose one would call it, focus for the year ahead. It's really good to go back and look at. That's been put together in whatever level of consciousness you want it to be. It can just be a fun thing to do. My sister and niece did it one year, and they really enjoyed it as a process. You know, other people, we can go into it quite deeply or not, as the case may be. And that started after a storyteller in Bowral told the story about how an island on the 6th of January, the men would serve breakfast to the women and would care for the women on the 6th of January every year, you know, which, okay, that's a very, very old ritual. So the masculine, or the, you know, divine masculine supporting the divine feminine, this whole Christ, Isis, Sophia, you know, there's always a male and a female aspect, but within the bigger context as well. So to me, it sort of pulls in a lot of the connection between the spiritual world and us as human beings, and also the elemental worlds, or the more instinctive worlds, I suppose. You can, and in Prokofiev's book, and I don't know about the one that you've got, there's this really, I find, not difficult to understand, but it's a massive picture of the connection with the constellations, not from an astrology viewpoint, but from the constellation viewpoint of which of the different spiritual beings and the hierarchies are working through at any given time, and what they're working on. So that might be a bit too much to bring in for people here, but it's quite fascinating to really start to look at that and start to merge that together. So, you know, that ties in with the epochs of the evolution of consciousness, like Aries, you know, being the ram. There's some references to the lamb, or the mystic lamb, you know, of Christ, and the connections obviously with Virgo, the Sophia, you know, the Demeter
opposite
stories.
each other.
Yeah. Well, so Aries is opposite Libra with the scales, and then you've got Pisces opposite Virgo, you know, so we're sort of moving out of, no, I won't go there because it'll confuse people. I was like, no, you've got to make this as simple as possible. So, you know, here we are on earth, paying attention to our dreams, taking our questions to sleep each night to the spiritual world in picture forms as best we can through the 25th of December to January the 6th, with that point on New Year's Eve where the number of the year changes and the influence of the year changes. So, you know, Chinese New Year or Asian New Year, there's always a different animal year. You know, this was Year of the Rat. And it's also connected to the elements of the water rat or the fire rat or the metal rat or the, you know, so there's influences and the yin and yang and blah, blah, blah. So once again, all these old rituals, beliefs, practices that have come about sort of start to come together. And a lot of people believe at New Year's Eve, you know, at that change. I mean, why do we all go, yay, happy new year? You know, it's like, is it just a superficial, let's get together and drink some nice wine and eat some nice food? Or does something actually really happen there? You know, and if we have an understanding of numbers and letters and sound and colour and everything else, then of course something does happen there. It's not just a let's go and sit on Santa's lap at Christmas time. There is an actual reason that we celebrate Christmas, you know, so it can be as light and fluffy as you want, or as deep and chewable and digestible as you want it to be.
Yeah.
And that's where, you know, I'm conscious of time. You know, this Three Kings preparation of Hugo Erber is quite fascinating for me. So is that enough of a picture of the 12 holy nights?
It's a great picture, and I think that it's enough for people to start with, having that that practical exercise of using each day, reflecting on, you know, what it is that's happening. It's kind of like each day is a like divination tableau. I was thinking it's just similar because every year I do a tarot reading where I look at each month ahead, but with a tarot card. And I like the idea, instead of it being in a card that's flat, using each day as how I would reflect or observe the tarot card. I feel like that feels to me, I mean, tarot cards and all of those things have their place, and I'll probably still use it in a way, but actually using real life, my senses, the relationships around me, that feels a lot more real and a lot more integrative of my spiritual cognition and my physical body and the elementals. I feel like there's more, it's richer.
Yes.
So, anyway, I think
they're expanding it a bit more. And the tarot is interesting, and the inner child cards are beautiful because they work with all the stories. And they came out of Fintorn, you know, 30 years ago. So I use them a lot. I think, you know, because they confirm for us. Once again, it's this proof thing that lots of people need when they're on their journeys. My intuition, gut feelings, right, sort of thing.
And it's always good to have multiple tools in your toolkit and learning new things. So yes, I think that's great. And like I said, I'll put more information and stuff in the show notes so people can explore. And I like how you said also that you can be as light and fluffy or deep as you want to be, not to put people off, to feel like you have to go into it. And it has to be like every night you have to spend 2 hours meditating, or which you can if you want, but it doesn't have to be like that.
No, but it might just even be that whole, you know, starting that simple practice and trying to do it as consciously as possible, of doing that backward journey of your day before you go to sleep, which, you know, is one of Steiner's important steps that we all need. And coming to, well, what's still resonating there out of that day, and how, you know, maybe I can get some support from my spiritual guides, my angel, my team, and then really waking up as consciously as possible the next morning and trying to write it down or capture it somehow in something, and then taking that forward. So there's loads of different ways, but yeah,
that's great. So I mean, we've been talking about the last night being Epiphany, the Three Kings night, which is a perfect segue into the Three Kings biodynamic preparation and what you're going to do this year with it. Tell us about that.
Well, you know, things come forward, don't they, to you when you're open. And so I noticed that the Josephine Porter Institute in the States was actually advertising and have put up on their page, which I think we in the BD Association need to do as well, the preparations, and have put together Hugo Erber's Three Kings preparation, and also he has another preparation which I didn't pay attention to when I bought these first ones, but I did recently. So I've now, they're on their winging their way here for the elementals, to actually work with the elementals. So this is on their little piece of paper here. It says that Hugo Erber, or Erb, I'm sorry, don't know how to pronounce that, was a German biodynamic farmer, and he developed, it's got HE8 and HE9 as companion sprays to be used as offerings to the elemental kingdom, who work to release the forces that enable a plant to root, sprout, grow, blossom, and more. So HE8, or the Three Kings prep, was originated to help protect against the activities of opposing forces. So where are we today in the world? Was my ping moment. That could be helpful. And HE9 is intended to serve as an expression of gratitude to the elemental beings.
I like that.
So I was like, and it's recommended that one should not use the Three Kings preparation unless one has first used all 9 of the biodynamic preparations on the area to be treated. And I would say that's a really good warning, because I've had some experiments, kind of that I've done consciously or otherwise with using the preps, and have had experiences of what happens when you overstimulate things, or put 501 out, for example, before you've put out at least 2 500s and things like that. But anyway,
I'm intrigued.
So
we could talk about
yeah.
that.
Well, we have to be, this is the responsibility thing. If we're going to really work with biodynamics, what we are attempting to do, and it is only an attempt, is to really hold that position of kaitiaki and listen for what our land and whatever it is needs from us, not what we want to do to it or on it or with it. What does it, it's not really it, what do they want from us? And, and a point comes, I think, for most people when you're working in your garden, where you start, you're going to put something somewhere and you go, I wonder if that's the best spot for that. And you just have a question and then move it somewhere else, or you plant something somewhere and it doesn't do particularly well, but you get a feeling to move it somewhere else and it suddenly takes off. So, starting to tune in on that level. And the important thing with working with biodynamics is it's not just putting out a bit of fertilizer and a bit of compost and a bit of spray. It's really consciously trying to bring in as much of a balanced cosmic earthly connection as we possibly can out of our own strivings to bring the best balance we can. And in some ways it's no different than chucking out a whole lot of superphosphate on the land, and that'll be good. It's like, well, why am I putting the superphosphate out there? What's it going to do? How's it going to affect this whole environment? How's it going to affect the animals, the people, the elementals, or the fire, water, air, earth? It's like you can do something or you can really take that focus. And that's my understanding of working with biodynamics, that anybody can grow anything. What's the difference with organic or permaculture? Yeah, there's a lot of consciousness goes into that, or regenerative. But once we start working with the preparations, we are actually altering what is there. So there needs to be real responsibility, like anything, when we do that. And so, while people might go, oh, yay, Three Kings preparation. Yeah, that sounds cool. Let's do that. I just want to put a warning out there. Yep, great. Well, head's going buzzy, so I need to say this. Make sure that you can work with somebody that does know what's happening. It's really powerful. I had an amazing, it's another ping moment doing this in Australia. Anyway, so just to finish on this, so the Three Kings prep is myrrh, obviously, and they send you a little packet of your myrrh, which didn't really know what myrrh was.
What is myrrh?
Slightly, I'm imagining it's a mineral. because it feels quite like sand.
Yeah.
Anyway, I have to look it up.
I wonder if it's like sap or something.
Yeah, your frankincense.
Oh, yeah.
Which, you know, there's a lot. I mean, frankincense is really good for all of us in this time as well. And then your aurum metallicum D2. So this is potentized gold, basically.
Ooh.
Really
Wow.
found up. And then you get, it's really sweet, you know, because I mean, I have tank water here, but you get a little bottle of rainwater all the way from America, and you get your vegetable glycerin, because you need to mix this, and so basically you mix it all together. You've got to grind everything up together, and you have to do that for an hour. So it's like when you're making the silica prep, the 501, you have to grind your quartz crystal up. So you've got to grind all of these for an hour, and then you've got to mix it with your rainwater and your glycerin to make your whole potency. And then and they say, and I remember Brian saying this when he made it as well, that you make it between 11 and 12, or is it 11:30 and 12:30? Does it say on here? Somewhere I read it. But yeah, so you mix it on New Year's Eve.
Oh, okay.
So between the change of the old year to the new year, and then you store it.
Around midnight?
Yeah. So it's either 11, well, it must be 11:30 to 12:30. I'm pretty sure that's right, but yeah, I'll have to check that. Does it say here? I don't know that it does. Oh, yes, it does. Here we go. Another man, Michael Hahn, long experience with this preparation, says the best time for making the mixture is on New Year's Eve from 11:30 to 12, like 11:30 p.m. to 12:30 a.m. This is a very significant time since, according to Rudolf Steiner, the transition from one year to the next coincides with a unique moment when the consciousness of the plant world and that of the minerals is united. Now, we have to remember that it's winter in Europe. So for them, they're at their winter solstice. So the question for us is we're at the summer solstice. So I'm not saying that the plant and mineral world isn't united, but that's our cosmic time. So we're working with the light and warmth ethers. So just something.
Would you possibly experiment later on and do it at our midwinter?
Yeah. I bought 2 sets so I could try and do to see what would be the difference there. So I think, you know, I think that's something we could definitely do and try and encourage a whole lot of us to do. So we've got more than just me doing this. Anyway, so so then on 3 Kings Day, 6th of January, you mix 1 teaspoon of the preparation, dissolving it first in a little warm water, 60 degrees Celsius. Stir in about 8 litres of water plus 2 cups of hand-warmed rainwater or pond water warmed through the sun, because you usually want to do your preps at blood temperature if you can, like keep the water at that level. A non-metallic container should be used, so not a metal bucket like we would potentially use for the other preps. And stirring should proceed for an hour in the manner described, same as doing, you know, like your vortexing for any of your preps. While stirring, the purpose for the spray is intended, for which the spray is intended, should be held in consciousness, and it should be sprayed out immediately after stirring during the late afternoon, the cosmic etheric in-breathing period, which, you know, once again, this is Northern Hemisphere, and for us it's out-breathing. So, you know, there's always something to adjust here. Using the bucket and brush, etc. As for horn manure, it should be sprayed outwards along the boundary. Now, they say at 5 metre intervals. Well, you know, I live on a 600 square metre plot, so I'm not going to be doing that. So I'll have to try and do some maths to work out how to do this. Anyway, and then how to spray it out. And so you do use the form of an outward moving spiral from the central focus to the outside. So you start in the center and you walk around doing your spraying to the outside boundary of your land.
Nice.
Yeah. So my two experiences that I've had. The first one was with Brian and his then partner Sandra in Mittagong. I'm trying to remember whether my daughter was born or not, and I think she was. Anyway, they mixed it up, and it was, Brian had heard about it, and so thought, well, yeah, we've had the preps here for a long time, so, and we used to make the preparations and bury them there, not just use them. And so they mixed up the Three Kings prep in this beautiful hypericum oil. And hypericum oil is this stunning colour. It was quite funny, actually, when I put that photo up on my Vortex Biodynamics page. I'm sort of wearing that orangey reddy colour. So it's not a crimson red, it's a real beautiful red. It's just stunning colour, and it was like you could almost see the gold in it as well. And so he'd already mixed it up, and we stirred it, and it was such an interesting experience because hypericum, of course, is to calm the nerves, and it's good for helping you to sort of relax and let go of anxiety, and it can not put you to sleep but take you towards a sleepy state. And so I had this whole experience of my arm almost dissolving as I was stirring. It was really weird. Of course it wasn't, but that was the feeling of it. And at the same time, how do I explain this? Becoming warmed, like a beautiful red gold velvet cloak was being wrapped around it. That's my picture of it. It was delicious, absolutely delicious. It was quite a sensual experience compared to stirring them in, cow manure and the other preps, obviously, which also partly, okay, there was just a small amount of this oil, but in the warmed water. So, and a sort of, sleepy, I'm just going to call velvety, sensuous kind of feeling that it was actually took me into quite a deep, like when I'm really in a deep meditation, it's like I'm not asleep, but I'm in a very deep, warm space kind of thing. So we did that for an hour, and then we put it out. And once again, I'm going to cry because it was astonishing, absolutely astonishing, the effect. Picture, how can I give a picture? So, I've already said that I could experience how the prana changed with the 500 and the other prep. This was like, oh gosh, it's always hard to put these experiences into words. It was like being in a world of light with golden stars in it, sparkling, like sparklers, maybe, how sparklers go. So that was how it was, walking around, and with every flick out, it was like flicking out the sparkly golden light forces. And and I'm not saying it was an ecstatic moment, but it was in that level. It was really elevated in a way. Like silica can excarnate people very easily, but this was like really connecting with the cosmos. It was astonishing, and it was like a dome, like a form was put over the land that held, and we had 12 years of drought in Australia, and basically, if you kept anything alive, we were down to, a cup of water a day kind of thing for a quick splash and water to drink, and that was it.
Wow.
And I firmly believe, no scientific proof or evidence, but I lost nothing. None of my plants died. And the fact that there had been biodynamics on that property at that stage for maybe 12 years or so, and then we had this Three Kings preparation, I really firmly believe that something quite extraordinary happened on that land. So that's my main experience. The second experience was a little bit similar. It was different, but I think that's the important one that I'd like to share.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate.
So yeah, just be interesting this year to see, doing it here in New Zealand, not Australia, and also trying to work with the 12 Holy Nights as well, how that might pull things together.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to hear too that it's something that you have to have had biodynamics on your land for a while before you do that.
Well, at least your compost preps.
Yeah.
And at least 500 and 501. If one's missing, there's time to put it out beforehand. Like a lot of people tend to not use the 501, the silica preparation, but we really need it, and particularly with all the extra chemicals in the atmosphere these days, etc. Then, Glenn Atkinson says it's really important to really up the use of the 501, and I've certainly seen the difference when I use that as well. So, this time between now and Christmas, if people want to put out some 500 and some 501 and use the compost preps, you could just make a small cowpat pit, even in a terracotta pot, and put your preps into that and have that in the ground, or make a compost and put your preps in, or find somebody's property where there has been a good use of the preparations, vignerons and olive growers and, farmers and gardeners. And I mean, down your way, there'll be lots of people that will have done that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And I think Marinus LaRouge has also worked with the Three Kings prep. I've only heard that. I don't know him very well, because obviously I know lived in Australia for 28 years, so I know the BD people more there, but I've been back for 14 years now. So yeah, so there's other people that would be interesting to find out what their experiences were.
Yeah, true. That would be interesting. Cool. Well, thank you, Christine. What a lovely chat. I've really enjoyed hearing a bit about your life story, and learning more about the Holy Nights, and then bringing it into the Three Kings preps. It felt like it really flowed and was all meant to be spoken. So I really appreciate you sharing what you have.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well,
hopefully it will help people to sort of, start to think that there are things that we can all do in this time. There's a lot of fear in the world. There's a lot of sense of hopelessness and concern about going forward about what might be happening. And so if we can invite the spiritual world to work with us, either through the earth with the preparations, or the cosmos through perhaps art and meditation and doing these practices, then that's a win-win in my book. So yeah, I've got some thoughts for next year, and I'm not sure if I'll do it yet, because it might be too much, but we'll see. But because I usually paint through that time and end up either with a series of paintings or one painting if I'm doing a veiling. But interestingly, I haven't done a lot of art this year, so I'm looking at that. And the thought did come that I might actually do an online sort of life myth version through the Holy Nights, where perhaps I give a little indication and I readjust the life myth process so that we follow the Star Child story, and cut back some of the things, or people will do that on their own, but use the 12 Holy Nights as a focus for that. So I'm kind of mulling that over at the moment, that's something that I might start, and I'm thinking to do that in the evening rather than the morning, so that it would help people to take those questions and thoughts into sleep, rather than it being at the beginning of the day.
Yeah.
So that's a work in progress. We'll see where we go with that.
So do you think if people were following you on Instagram or somewhere, they'd be able to keep be kept in the loop with that if they wanted to join in?
Yeah, I once I've kind of got it sorted and worked it out, I'd do it through Zoom, I think.
Yeah.
And I could post something about that, yeah, on Vortex. I could send it to you maybe if people might be interested as well.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's still in the thought process at the moment, so we'll see where it lands.
Cool.
But that's starting to come together as a good thing.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, is there anything else that you wanted to say before we leave, or shall we, or where people can find you? Because it seems like things might start to progress over the next year, and you do offer certain services that people might be interested in talking to you about.
Sure. Well, yeah, I've got my Vortex Biodynamics Instagram and Christine Moginie Instagram as well. I am on Facebook as Christine Moginie. Actually, I think it's Colour and Conversations as Instagram, isn't it? Conversations in Colour and Vortex. I was trying to remember now.
Biodynamic. I'll find it and write it down.
Yeah. And then and my email is christinemoginie@gmail.com. So, you know, until I get the whole websitey, bloggy, whatever I'm going to do things sorted, which will be next year.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then the old way of doing it. And I'm happy if people want to contact me, I can give them my phone number and they can text me. You know, or I'm happy to share that here. You know, I don't imagine anybody's going to sort of spam me with things if I give it up. But yeah, you know, if people contact you and they can't get hold of me, I'm happy for you to pass on my phone number. So
yeah, very good.
Yeah, but thank you. Yeah, it's always interesting talking about your own life and what you actually end up saying out of what you've done.
Isn't that funny, eh? When you've got an hour and a half, it's like, what do you say? What do you leave out? It's interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting, an interesting experience in itself, really.
Yes. Yeah, well, we've all got big biographies. We've all done a lot. And yeah, and that's the nice thing, as you say, you know, to hear different people's stories, where the synchronicities are, where the moments are, where the moments, you know, and yeah, it sort of wraps different qualities around us, doesn't it? And
yeah, it certainly does.
Mere, that's what they look like, sort of thing, or sound like. Yeah. So thank you for the opportunity, and yeah, well, I'll go off now and do my little art class with my people and leave you to do whatever it is that you're doing today.
Yeah, all kinds of fun things. Yeah, thank you very much, and I wish you a happy Advent and a holy 12 nights.
Thank you, and same for you.